I always feel like everyone's complaining about the current state of gaming and that there's nothing fun to play and that there's no new games. And last year, I made a video called The State of Gaming where I found a bunch of games that I thought I would like to play to show that maybe it's not all so bad and maybe I need to just be a little less picky. And I had a really fun time making it and playing all the games. And so I plan to do it again. So, welcome back to The State of Gaming 2024. The games that I chose last year, while I did try to keep them within 2022, there were games that I deviated from, but this purely going to be 2023 games, except for like one, but it came out in like December of 2022, so we're going to count it. The rules are going to be the same. I've never heard about the games until I bought them or found them on the Steam store, and I have to play every game for at least 1 hour. And just like last year, just for tradition's sake, here's the amount of porn games that came out in the last week. Okay, not even. Anon's Nico Wives, Futanari Tales, Horny Housewives, Horny Holiday, Hot MILF VR, Hot Mom Wants Sex, Hentai Nude Quest, My Incubi Harem, Pimp Life Sex Simulator, Sex MILFs, Sex Simulator Bar Girls. With all the formalities out of the way, let's get started. Mortal Sin was a game that was recommended to me by a friend, and I was drawn to it immediately, purely just based off the visual factor. I loved the colors, I loved the art style, I really loved everything about it. The first time you ever see gameplay, it's a little tough to look at, but you actually get used to it pretty quickly. Within, I would say, 10 minutes, you're already kind of used to the art style, and the dev, as of the time of this recording, has put out patch notes and updates to basically so that you can be able to adjust some of the intensity of the art design in a way that kind of easier for you to see. But otherwise, you get a character that you choose or a class that you choose, and you spawn in and you get swords and different types of weapons and things, shields. When you enter a dungeon, the goal is to make it from point A to point B. Very simple. The more you play and the more challenges you complete, you unlock better weapons, you get better gear. You could unlock more classes that have different skills and spells and things. Overall, I found Mortal Sin to be super refreshing. Maybe not so much gameplay-wise, but visually. I find that it's very hard to find games or to look at a game and be like, that's actually a unique thing. Like, I haven't seen that before. Everything kind of is starting to look repetitive and kind of look like each other, and Mortal Sin is certainly not that. While the gameplay is great, for me, the part where Mortal Sin thrives is in the visuals. Mortal Sin doesn't run into the problem that other roguelikes have, where it kind of starts out slow and ends up hectic. Well, Mortal Sin does end up hectic in later parts of the game. Even the beginning still feels really quick if you need to get there quickly. With the inclusion of the dash, and if you know what you're doing, you can actually get through the beginning parts of the game, or the slower parts of the game, very quickly. So if you're looking for a new roguelike to play, I highly recommend Mortal Sin. I hate everything about Mineko's Night Market. I hate how tedious all the tasks are. I hate how there's an energy system. I hate how content is time-gated behind an in-game calendar. And yet, despite this, I found myself really enjoying it. I found the sense of progression to be really gratifying. I felt really good whenever I would see the town or the night market get upgraded. I loved bringing life back to this small Japanese town. And I really enjoyed the story that detailed this giant mystical cat that would help farmers, and I even enjoyed the more subtle, nuanced story that describes the relationship a single father has with his daughter and what it takes for a new family or a new kid to move into a new area. I find the art style to be really quaint and unique even. I found the dialogue between the characters, I found the humor to be right up my alley. I remember when I played it, I was just sitting there completing tasks, making my little crafts to sell at my night market, and then all of a sudden I checked and 8 hours had went by. Despite how much I wanted to hate Mineko's Night Market, I really did have a great time. Moons of Darsalon. Moons of Darsalon was one of the few games that actually surprised me this year. I remember looking at the trailer and looking at the Steam photos, and I thought it was going to be kind of a crappy nostalgia grab for really old people who like adventure games. And it didn't end up being that at all. It was actually this very sophisticated Pikmin-esque rescue game. You basically play as this little guy who goes around and saves other little guys, and you need to basically issue commands and do things that satisfy the requirements for the people who need to be rescued, whether that's illuminate their pathway or build a path towards them or get them to go a certain direction or go in a teleporter. And the game basically constantly layers and layers and layers different obstacles to keep it interesting, whether it's enemies, whether it's mechanics, whether it's new level design ideas. The game consistently keeps it fresh, and it rewards you with a cool little dance at the end. So a fun little surprise, Moons of Darsalon was. Catboy, I did not like. It's meant to be a kind of classic platform action guy where you play as a catboy and you have to save the people from these like Nazi dogs or whatever, and I couldn't get behind it. The story I thought was weird. The level design I thought was okay. And I could honestly forgive all of it, but the way that Catboy moved was so slippery and loose in such a bad way. And I remember there's this feature where if you hit the ceiling, if you bonk your head on the ceiling, you stop gaining vertical clearance, obviously, because you hit your head, but the velocity that you get in the X direction is completely unaffected. So there were times I hit my head, I'm moving just as fast to the left and right, but I'm no longer going up. And I remember it so vividly just messing me up on so many parts of the game. When the game works, it feels really good. It feels like super crisp, but those moments are far and few between. So, Catboy, a bit of a dud. I'm upset to say. Thronefall was a game I kept my eye on for most of this year because I do really enjoy strategy games and kind of slower paced games. And Thronefall has all the things that I like, which is upgrading your area and spawning guys that do stuff for you. And that's exactly what you do. There is one aspect of Thronefall that I don't love, which I do like having guys that do stuff for me, but I want my guy to do what I want him to do. And Thronefall does have the unfortunate mechanic that you can't actually aim with your guy. Your guy just attacks whoever's near him, and usually that's fine, but there are times where I want to do something specific and he just can't do what I want him to do, and that's fine. But you spawn an area and you spawn in a level, and the level comes with challenges, and you get to basically, once you complete the level or complete all the challenges, you can complete all the challenges to 100% the game, and if you complete the level, you unlock the next level. And the challenges, you get basically more or less points depending on how many attributes. I don't remember what the game calls them specifically, but basically there are buffs and debuffs that you can apply. You can make your character have more health, or you can make your towers have further range, and that's just kind of to help you beat the game. And then there are the debuffs, so like enemies have more HP, you get less gold, you take more damage. Those debuffs are point multipliers so that you can complete challenges more easily, and the challenges are going to be based on those things, where they want you to take certain attributes, or they want you to do certain things in certain levels to kind of keep the game fresh. And there is a factor of like they're just trying to be sneaky with replayability, but it's a thoroughly enjoyable game. I would recommend Thronefall to anybody and everybody. Beyond Sunset was another game that really surprised me, actually. I thought, again, looking at the Steam trailer and looking at the photos, I thought it would just be a classic boomer shooter. I thought it was going to be like an Ultra Kill clone or a Cruelty Squad clone, and it ended up being its kind of own unique thing where, like, yes, it obviously borrows aspects from multiple games, but it's actually this open, like, or at least the level design is this open world. You have like a mission, but there's sort of side quests throughout the way. And I found the dialogue to be kind of my speed, humor-wise, and it was constantly changing. It was super dynamic and fluid. The enemies never stayed the same. The areas never stayed the same. I'll admit, I did play on an easier difficulty, so it's entirely possible that on harder difficulties, it's just ridiculously stupid, but I found the difficulty to be just reasonable enough that I wasn't kind of smashing my keyboard, but I still felt a bit of a challenge here and there, not in too frustrating of a way. So Beyond Sunset, I really enjoyed. Polylithics was a game I found kind of late into the year, and immediately I gravitated towards it just because of the color palette. I think it's super colorful, it's super vibrant. I'm usually not a huge survival game guy. Everything kind of feels like it's meant to be a Minecraft clone. But the way Polylithics looked, there's this added aspect of colony building. I do really enjoy. I do really enjoy when I can kind of make my own colony or village and make little houses or pathways for them. And so I decided to give Polylithic a try, and it was really fun. It's a bit hard at times to see items on the ground. When you're running around, it's a bit hard to see some of the smaller animals and some of the items. And they do try to combat that with a highlight feature, but I think with just how colorful of a game that is, it's just kind of it's just one of the downsides. It's just something you're gonna kind of have to just get used to. And the combat is a little bit tricky at times, but that's kind of the name of the game. It's kind of meant to be this sort of friable caveman type of thing. You almost feel like a caveman a little bit at times. Similar to kind of any survival game or sandbox game. And if you're the type of person who knows that you like colony sims or survival games or sandbox games, you kind of know this, but I'm personally very bad at making my own fun. I kind of struggle with these sandbox games a little bit, because once I run out of new stuff to do, I find I get bored very quickly. But if you're someone who enjoys sandbox games, if you're someone who enjoys making kind of lore for your guys, I don't know, maybe you can start some sort of intertribal beef or something. Polylithics is a lot of fun. I think it's early access right now. I would definitely pay attention to what these guys are doing. I really liked the gunk. It's not a game that's super fast-paced or has a bunch of combat, but it tells a pretty reasonable story. The gunk really kind of resides in the oddly satisfying category of games, right? Kind of think like House Flipper or Power Wash Simulator. You basically are a space guy, or space gal, and you land on a planet and there's a bunch of gunk there, and you have a little suck gun and you just suck up all the gunk, and it's a lot more fun than I care to admit. It feels really good when you're done sucking up all the gunk to see the area kind of clean up and see the life kind of come back to it. There are puzzle aspects to the game where basically certain foliage or certain flowers, the bulbs of them have energy properties that you can kind of use to activate other energy stuff. The puzzles are kind of just the right amount of challenging. There were a few times where I got stuck, and it does run into the rare problem where sometimes you'll miss a piece of gunk and you're kind of sitting around looking around for that very small piece of gunk that's stopping you from unlocking a full area. But generally, I had a really great time just exploring the planet, and I thought the art style was like a really cute claymation. Claymation usually is kind of a little odd, a little spooky to me personally, but I really liked the kind of how portly everyone looked. Everyone kind of looks very squatty, I don't know. But I really enjoyed the gunk. Sanabi is a game where you play as a father and you basically go on quests that your daughter sends you on, whether that's getting raspberries or blowing up Tyrannosaurus balloons, and it gives you a little insight into what it's like to be a single father raising a daughter on your own. Nah, I'm just kidding. It's actually this sweet-ass game where you, like, grapple hook all over the place, and you, like, attach to people, and they, like, explode, and you just go so fast sometimes. And to say that, like, the mechanics and the way that they introduce it to you, to say that it's intuitive is an understatement. It's not doing it justice. It's almost instinctive, like you've done it before. Aside from introducing core mechanics, there are times where they need to introduce core mechanics, like charging up a dash or winching or something like that, where you like winch your grapple arm. Aside from when you learn that the very first time, when it basically tells you that you can do that, it's incredibly intuitive. Like you see something and you're just immediately drawn to it. You immediately know what to do. It's super effortless. Highly recommend Sanabi. Though I will say they do this one thing in the story that I do absolutely despise that they do in games, where you're playing through the game, you're doing the story, you're learning the dialogue, you're learning the characters, and then right at the end, they let you choose a certain route or a certain path, and I hate when games do that. It feels like the devs or the story writers, they did all this work laying down the groundwork, and then it feels like they're afraid. It feels like they're too cowardly to choose a route to say, hey, this is how we want our game to end. So instead of actually taking a stand and letting their art speak for themselves, they almost let the player decide which ending they think is more satisfying. It feels like a cop-out, and I can't stand it. But otherwise, Sanabi is fantastic. Art is Rifle is, and I know I've been saying it kind of a lot, but Art is Rifle is another game that really surprised me. From what I saw through the trailers and Steam photos, it looked really confusing. It didn't look like a game. I mean, it's a puzzle game. It's kind of meant to be confusing, but it looked confusing in such a way that you watch the trailer and you're like, what is even going on? I actually have no idea what's even trying to be shown to me. But once you actually get into the game, the way that the game is structured is you basically need to match the colors of shapes. So I'm going to try and give like a really brief, it is somewhat complicated, but basically you need to make shapes match colors. So it'll give you a cube, a sphere, and a triangle, and you need to make them all the same color. Depending on the shape of the object, the way that it retains color is going to be slightly different. And that's kind of the basis of the whole game. And then as you play through the game, it adds kind of various steps. It adds various layers to it that don't make it too frustrating, and it's still kind of fun to learn and explore. They're not afraid to play around with the visuals of it. They're not afraid to let the player roam free in a way. The way that the game is structured, you're basically just in one giant open area, and you could basically use whatever you want around you at your disposal. And they're going to throw enemies at you, right? The enemies are just kind of like shapes that have certain effects, whether that's lasers or gravity, or they hide the blocks every so often. They keep it really fresh and really entertaining the whole way through. I really liked Art is Rifle. I love fast-paced boomer shooters. I think a lot of people do. I think there's a bit of a resurgence coming through. And Killbug, it looks really good. It looks really fluid, and it is. It's a very simple game. You spawn in with a gun and a sword, and you shoot bugs, or you kill bugs. You can shoot them. If you swing at them with your sword, if you stab at them, it reloads your gun, and there are these sort of hidden, not so hidden combos that you can do that can make your gun or sword or your character do special things. And the goal is to basically survive as long as possible. And there's this global leaderboard. And the global leaderboard, eventually once you get good enough in the game, is the main motivator. But the first couple of times that you play the game, the goal is to reach all the bosses, to reach the centipede bosses, and hopefully to God Bug. It feels really hectic and chaotic in a good way. And my only real gripe with Killbug, and this is kind of a gripe with a lot of roguelikes or games where you have to reset a lot, when you're in the thick of it, when you're really brawling and scrapping and you're going crazy, and then you kind of die right at the end, especially if it's on a PR run, and then you have to go back to the beginning, it just feels so slow. It feels so slow by comparison, and that's really the only thing I don't like about Killbug. That, and there is only one map, but I think that one map is made well enough that you could easily sink in 10, 25, 50, possibly even 100 hours into that one map before you even think about wanting another one. Top Dog is another leaderboard game that I grabbed. I feel like playing games are kind of a lost art nowadays. All you really got to work with is like Battlefield and War Thunder, which are both not great games in my mind. And so I grabbed Top Dog just because I thought it'd be kind of a fun little thing. It'd be kind of something new, something different. And Top Dog suffers a problem that a lot of kind of leaderboard games do, where the goal is to basically just score as high on the leaderboard as you can, where it gets really repetitive at times. And the beginnings are always slower. But I think Top Dog, it's fun for a little bit. Having to maintain a combo at times is really difficult, and I always kind of find doing the same thing over and over and over again really frustrating. And some games like Killbug, as I mentioned earlier, kind of keep it fresh because of how fast-paced they are, because you kind of get back into the thick of it so quickly. Top Dog is already kind of slower in nature. Even though you're piloting a plane, it's not a super fast-paced game because of just the way that planes handle and the way that you have to turn and maneuver. So if you like plane games, I'd recommend Top Dog, but it was kind of middle of the road, you know, if you have a couple bucks to spare. 07 is going to be the third and final leaderboard game that I cover this year. None of them have been super fantastic games, except for maybe Killbug. But 07 is certainly the crappiest made of them all. The character moves very freely in a bad way, especially when you get kind of panicky, and the game does get panicky. The character moves, it's almost too responsive to the controls. So basically, the goal of the game is you start at the bottom of a tower, and you need to go as high up in the tower as possible. And the tower is infinitely generating, right? That's why there's a leaderboard. I think if you look on Steam, all of the reviews are just talking about the guy in first place has no life, right? And so all you're doing is just going up. And the designs repeat, and the types of jumps repeat, and it's more of an endurance game than anything else. And when you get really high up and you do get panicky and you're hitting buttons and the mouse sensitivity is really high, and the way that your character moves on these really small platforms, it can be really frustrating at times. And that is part of the game. I'll concede that that's part of the game. But if the only goal is to beat this guy who is already no-lifing it and has already spent hours and hours and hours, like, it seems like instead of playing more of the game just so that I can play more of the game, why can't I just have fun playing none of the game and then play none of the game as my reward and have even more fun? But if competing for that #1 spot is your jam, then 07 or any of these other leaderboard games, that's all you. I'm personally someone who really enjoys movement games, if that's not kind of obvious from the lineup of games that I've chosen this year, and Solar Ash did not disappoint in that regard. While I've never personally played Jet Set Radio or any of the thematic sequels that came after the fact, if they even feel half as good as Solar Ash, I can see why they have as cult of a following as they do. Solar Ash felt really good to zip around on the rails and around the areas. You're in this you're alone in this sort of very desolate area trying to look for others. And as you're exploring these worlds, these areas, eventually when you complete enough tasks, you spawn a boss. And the bosses in the boss fights are incredible. The bosses are super beautiful character design. They look like evil and scary. And like Shadow of the Colossus, you're supposed to kind of target weak spots in the skin of in the armor of the boss. And when you combine that with the fluidity of movement that the game has, it's almost like art. It's like a dance. It feels so incredible when you do it, especially if you do it first try and you nail it. You're just doing everything. You're sight checking everything. It feels really, really good to complete boss fights, and you're excited to get to the next area and do it again. Erra Exordium was a game that was good except for the very end. It's this sort of slow, 2D, dark, grimy game that's actually surprisingly difficult, if I can be honest with you. And it's difficult not because that there are a lot of options, but because there are so few. It's one of those things where basically there are two ways to make a game difficult, where one, you basically give the player tons of tools, and then you make the game actually hard. And then there's another aspect where you give the players almost no tools, and then you make the game not easy, but you make it you ask a lot of the player based on what you already have. So that, like, the character can't jump very high or very far, but you give them maximum pixel jumps. Like, you give them the max jump that they can. Or the character's not very fast, so you give them enemies that swipe kind of fast but have a large tail. Like, they telegraph their moves really well. And that's kind of what Erra Exordium does. And I was having a pretty good time enjoying the story. I liked the art style a lot. And everything was going well until the final boss. Or at least what I think is the final boss. Because I have not beat that motherfucker. That guy, he has so much HP. I do absolutely 0 damage. And the save that I currently have, I have no bullets. And the ads that come when the boss is spawned drop virtually 0 bullets. I remember I had a run. I think I was on a run that was like 15 minutes long. And in those 15 minutes, I got maybe 10 bullets. I did like a tenth of the boss's HP. And I'm like, dude, I'm going to have to be here for 4 hours just to beat this guy. Like, it's just not worth it. I don't want to say I rage quit, but Erra Exordium, it could have been so much more. If the devs see this, increase the bullet drop rate on the ads of that boss, because that's ridiculous. Forced Sacrifice Hejled, I don't know if I'm saying that right. Despite the edginess of the name and the profile picture, the game is actually nothing like that. It's actually this like super colorful and vibrant game with pretty upbeat music, and it's just a classic precision game. Think of like the World's Hardest Game, or that one Japanese precision game that you see speedrunners play sometimes. And it's It's actually a pretty, it's a good amount of fun. There are levels that the devs designed that you can play through where you just need to get from one area to the next. And sometimes there are the little checkpoints that open up the door, and you need to collect all the checkpoints to open up the main door. And it's actually a pretty good time, aside from when they spawn in swords, because the swords, I mean, eventually you memorize the timing and the positioning of them, but there's no, like, indicator. It's basically instant, which is fine. You eventually do get used to them. They're not nearly half as bad as the saw blades. The saw blades are literally purely random, and that actually makes the game impossible at times, right? Because the saw blades are just constantly bouncing around the area, and they're bouncing into each other. So there are going to be fragments or segments of the game where it's going to be actually impossible to get to the next area unless you run into them or wait. And vice versa, there are going to be segments of the game where it's very easy because there's no saw blades because they're stuck somewhere else. And once you kind of defeat the campaign area, there's like a free mode, infinite mode that you can play, where basically the goal is to survive as long as possible, and you can collect these little orbs as like a little bonus, but they just kind of keep throwing obstacles at you constantly, and it's a good bit of fun. It's just a little dumb fun. The game, I think, is free, so it's, you know, if you're super bored, it's not a super awful idea to just hop on, grab it. Maybe you can compete with friends over your time. Super worth it. Gator was a great time. Gator, it's fun, it's whimsical, it's a little mobile game-esque. I'll give you that. There are times where I'm like, am I playing Subway Surfers? Am I playing Temple Run? Gator's not that, especially when you get to those platforming sections. It's super fast-paced, it's super intuitive, it's super fluid, super dynamic, all the buzzwords I love to say. It feels really good. The camera controls really well. And at first I thought that those skater parts would be the parts that I would end up despising because they're so mobile game-esque, but when you get to those later ones, especially the boss fight ones where it's actually kind of difficult and you actually need to kind of pay attention to what the bumpers are doing or what the obstacles and structures are, and you kind of pick up that speed, it feels really good. And the challenge is there, especially if you want to go for kind of a speed run mode. If you're someone who enjoys speed games, especially repetitive speed games, I think Gator is the game for you. Smushi Come Home was a game I really enjoyed. I'll admit it's very simple, but as someone, I've played a lot of games. I've played a lot of games, especially games that are really complicated. Smushi Come Home is a really nice sort of breath of fresh air. It's Metroidvania-esque, so you kind of load into an area, you kind of complete all the quests and stuff, and then you're able to move on to the next area. And what happens is Smushi is a mushroom, you're you, and you defend your little mushroom Umi from getting attacked by a bird, and then the bird grabs you and sends you away and whisks you away, and you're trying to come home to your mushroom brothers and sisters, or whatever they are. And as you're going through areas, you're discovering new tools, new tactics, you're upgrading your character. The platforming feels really smooth. It feels really good to jump up from one area to the next. So there are some games, 3D platforming games, that I personally struggle with depth perception a lot. I thought the camera in Smushi was really good. I really enjoyed Smushi Come Home. My only complaint with Smushi Come Home was I think I beat it in like 3 hours or something like that. It's a very simple game. It's a very baby game. I would highly recommend if you want to get somebody into Metroidvanias, I think Smushi Come Home is the way to do it. It's very linear, it's very straightforward, it's almost impossible to get lost. The maps aren't particularly big, the puzzles aren't too complicated. Even if you forget something or find yourself lost in the map, it's almost impossible to get lost, but even if you do get quote-unquote lost, you're probably in an area where you need to do something anyway, so it's totally fine. I thoroughly enjoyed Smushi Come Home. Smurf's Kart was a mess. I'm pretty sure it's made by the same guys who made Garfield Kart, and I'll give you this. It's from like an engine, from a mechanical standpoint, Smurf's Kart is actually the better game. One thing that Smurf's Kart kind of neglects to tell you, because you assume it from Garfield Kart is multiplayer. Smurf's Kart is not. It is exclusively couch co-op multiplayer. I don't know who is buying Smurf's Kart and then calling up their friends from the office and going, hey man, you want to play some fucking couch co-op Smurf's Kart? I do not know who that is, but it is not me. The game is infuriating. Even the time trials are infuriating. Everything about the game is frustrating. The levels are shittily designed. You have to get these like smurf berries instead of coins like in Mario Kart to pick up speed, and if you don't get the smurf berries, you'll insta-lose to the bots, because the bots like kind of know the perfect route, but even if they don't know the perfect route, they still get the speed buff from the smurfs berries. The way that the cart drifts feels really bad. There's no items in time trials, there's only items in local couch co-op, and I don't have anyone to play local couch co-op Smurfs Kart with me. It was just, the whole game was a mess. I just found myself hating the Smurfs after this. Smurfs Kart was not Smurftastic. Arto was a game that I thought was okay. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. They do this thing where they change the art style constantly, which is something I generally don't love in video games. I found the story to be a little reachy for my taste. The combat was actually pretty decent. I'll give the game that the combat was actually, it felt pretty good. Fighting the ads wasn't that bad, and I remember the boss fights were actually pretty fun, all things considered, but it does have some Metroidvania elements in it, and there were times where I kind of found the instructions from the map or what the game wanted me to do kind of confusing. It's kind of in that weird middle ground where it wants to be so much more than just kind of an indie Metroidvania thing. Like, it's more complicated than Smushi Come Home, but it doesn't warrant, the quality of it doesn't warrant that extra complication. And there were times where I remember when the credits actually rolled, I think I accidentally skipped like several areas just because the game was unclear about what I wanted. There was one guy, I ran into an area where it was like a clown area, and this balloon was like, please don't pop me, and I'm like, oh, well, obviously the game wants me to pop the balloon, so I popped the balloon, and turns out I accidentally just locked myself out of an area that was, you know, however many hours of gameplay, probably like at least an hour of gameplay. So, I mean, maybe I'm viewing Arto a little bit biased, but I thought Arto was just kind of okay. The Pit was a game that I kind of picked up on a goof. I thought it looked kind of crappy. I'll level with you, it was like 90% dead. The way that the Pit works, the boss swings at you, you parry, and the parry builds up a counter. And the larger you build up the counter, the more powerful your next punch slash combo will be. And what happens when you first spawn into the game, when you do the tutorial, it feels very clunky. I say tutorial, but what it actually is you hit play, and then you fight 3 bosses, and it feels like crap, and you're like, oh, that sucked. And then it rolls the credits, and you're like, that's it? That's the game? And it goes, welcome to New Game Plus. You've finished the tutorial, and you're like, oh yeah, now we're talking. And then the game still feels like shit. It still feels bad, except when you get to that one spear guy. That one spear bow staff guy, oh my god, that boss is perfect. When everything clicks together, when you've memorized the combo and you're perfectly parrying and you're like, it feels incredible. It feels really, really good. And then you beat New Game Plus 1, and then the credit rolls, and it goes, you're not done yet. The harder the game gets, the better the core mechanic becomes. Because if the core mechanic is that you need to parry bosses, the harder the bosses get, the more they're going to swing at you. The more they're going to swing at you, the more they're going to switch up their combos, the more parry meter you can build up, right? And the more they're swinging at you, you have less opportunities to swing back. So when the game is really, really difficult, that's when it's actually perfect, because the whole point is it's a dodge game. It's a dodging game. And then your reward for dodging is basically one-shotting the boss. And when you finally hit that really high meter and you have the opportunity to hit him after you hit that perfect parry, it feels so good. It's almost indescribable. Tiny Witch was a game that I thought was kind of okay. It's a pretty classic sim game. You make little minions. You're a witch who wants to own a minion making shop, and you basically signed away your soul to own this minion making shop, and you kind of need to earn your soul back. And you get rewards every 10 nights, and the nights are really long, and what they don't tell you is that when you need to work 10 nights, you also need to work 10 days. So it's more like you need to work 20 levels to reach the 10 nights. And I found that the game was really slow in a way that I didn't enjoy, even at the parts that were fast. There were different customers and different recipes and formulas that I could make, but there's something, I mean, I've played games like Overcooked and stuff like that, where it's kind of based on that similar idea where customers get frustrated over time, and I found those games to be a lot more enjoyable and hectic and fluid than Tiny Witch did. I don't know if it's a co-op feature or aspect of it that changed that for me, but Tiny Witch it left a bit of a sour taste in my mouth at times, especially in the lull moments. There are times where there's like a huge lull, or there's such a, there are two types of lulls, right? Where there's one where there's nobody there, and you're sitting there just like preemptively making stuff, or there's too many people there and too much stuff is full and you're just kind of sitting there waiting for stuff to happen. And both happen a lot in a way that I really dislike. But one thing I did really like is that, so there's supposed to be milestones every kind of 10 days, right? And so my reward for after I completed the first 10 days of Tiny Witch was that the game crashed. So that I really liked. It was almost like, hey, you played enough Tiny Witch, so thank you. And it closed the game for me. So I did really like that feature. But otherwise, I thought Tiny Witch was kind of meh. I hated night crawlers. I couldn't stand this game. There was so much, I thought, I looked at it, I looked over the gameplay, I looked over the photos on Steam, and I thought it would be cool, I thought it would be fun, I thought maybe it'd be fun as co-op. I tried going in with as open of a mind as possible, and there are so many things wrong with the game. The game feels clumsy, it feels shittily made. The replayability factor, I think, is personally not there. It just looks crummy, but I could forgive all of it if they didn't make you spawn in the enemies manually. I thought it was just gonna be a classic, like, kind of bullet hell-ish, or I don't know if that's the right term, but basically you just spawn into a dungeon crawler area, and then a bunch of enemies spawn around you, and it's just super hectic, like, super satisfying, like, raw, I'm like, action all the time. It's not that at all. It's this incredibly frustrating, just mess of a video game. You spawn in the area, you're walking around the room, and you have to spawn the enemies manually. And it doesn't even spawn all the enemies in the room. It just spawns one wave of them, which is only like 3, 4, 5, 6 guys. And then you sit there and you kind of hit the X button or you hit the trigger button, whatever the attack button was, and you can't even tell that you're hitting them. It doesn't feel good at all. You can't even, I can barely even tell that the damage numbers are appearing on my screen. And then once that's done, you have to go and spawn the other wave. And so eventually you get bored, you spawn all the waves, and then you immediately die because the game isn't designed for you to handle all the waves because your weapon sucks and it's not meant to be satisfying to attack these people. You're just meant to be a coward and run around and be an annoying little bitch. I hated night crawlers. I do not recommend this game. This game, it made me upset that how much I hated this game. Do not get night crawlers. Psuedoregalia was a game I enjoyed. It is a simpler Metroidvania. I found it pretty straightforward. I found it very frustrating that there was no map, and I didn't find the combat particularly satisfying. I did really enjoy the platforming elements. I thought the platforming elements were really fantastic. I thought the way that the level design complemented all the new mechanics that it gives you with double jump and wall running and all the stuff and the bubbles. I thought that was really well done, but it seemed odd to me to include the combat as often or as frequently as they did. It seemed like it wasn't a focus, and they knew it wasn't a focus, but for someone or for a group of people who kind of knew it wasn't the focus, it was kind of odd how much they included it, but I get it. They needed something that added a little bit of edge, and it's not bad, it didn't feel satisfying. It definitely didn't feel like a focus, and it did kind of take away that aspect from me. I beat the game in, I think, 6 hours. I would have done that quicker if there was a map, or if I discovered, I realized way too late that there was actually like a checklist. Basically, you need to collect 5 keys to unlock a big door. And I would have completed the game a lot quicker if I knew that there was a checklist that basically said, hey, we will keep track of all the keys that you find, and we will tell you what areas you found them in, so you can just check other areas. I did spend a lot of time just going around in circles. So that one's on me. But generally, I found Psuedoregalia to be super enjoyable. I thought the visuals were great. It's nostalgic in just the right way, and you can actually change the settings to make it less nostalgic if you hate that shit anyway. So I thought Psuedoregalia was pretty fun. Wheelchair Tester was another game, really surprised me. I really enjoyed Wheelchair Tester. I really liked it. There are a lot of things working against Wheelchair Tester. I initially did streamer mode first, like an idiot. What I did not know about streamer mode is that it comes with no tutorial, checkpoints don't work, and the only audio cue are the checkpoints, which I thought was really weird, especially if the checkpoints don't work. But once I switched to non-streamer mode, Wheelchair Tester was actually fantastic. I traded working checkpoints for audio, so there's no music in the game aside from the checkpoints. The only noise in the game, aside from the boosters, is the sound of your character's head bobbing and back and forth all the time, and it makes this really annoying, like, thunk sound. I mean, eventually you drown it out, but my god, it's brutal. Once you're in that Zen mode, the game is actually, like, really fun and really well made. It has that kind of ragdoll-y effect that some of those, like, the totally accurate games used to have, but it's difficult in all the right ways. Your guy is still, like, pretty easy to control, all things considered, and the booster adds an element of free will that I find really enjoyable as well, where basically there are certain areas or jumps that you think you've lost it, but then you can boost out of it, kind of like in Rocket League, right, where you can kind of fly around a little bit, and that little extra added core mechanic, like that little extra added spice to it, really makes a lot of the puzzles and some of the more tricky parkour stuff in the game really, really enjoyable. And it never gets old and stale, and sometimes you may get to certain parts of the game where you're like, oh, I'm never, like, making that. I'm never going to be able to do it. But once you try, it's such a... Wheelchair Tester is such a fantastic homage to what it's like to actually succumb to disability, where you go, man, there's no way I'm going to be able to do that, to live my normal life, to do what it does. And then you just try, you give it a try and you see what this little wheelchair guy can do. And there's just something so powerful about seeing him scale such large ramps, fly across the maps, go in rings and loop-de-loops and circles. It's a really powerful game, and I really enjoy it, and I think everyone should play it. Well, that's all. That's the show. I don't have any more games. I really enjoyed most of this year's lineup, and one of the great tragedies of this series is sometimes I'll go back to the Steam store and I'll actually find more games that I want to play that came out this year. I do wish maybe that I played more multiplayer games, but I feel like, I don't know, multiplayer games don't really seem, they kind of meh. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I'll smell you guys later. Bye, Z's.